Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my hands-on preview of the Fujifilm X-H2, a high-end mirrorless camera with a new 40 megapixel sensor and 8K video. Launched in September 2022 and costing around $2,000 or £1,900, the X-H2 may sit jointly at the top of the range, but its new sensor is likely to end up in multiple bodies going forward, so its performance will be interesting to all Fujifilm fans. I've got my hands on the final production body and have already begun work on my in-depth review, but I wanted to share some news and results about it as soon as it became official, so treat this as an appetizer to the upcoming main course that I'll link to here when it's ready. The X-H2 shares top billing in the X series with the existing X-H2S, launched 4 months earlier. Both share essentially the same weather-sealed body with the same controls, so that means a PASM mode dial, the same flip screen, same viewfinder, battery, ports, including full-size HDMI, the same built-in stabilization, and the same accessories too, including a pair of battery grips and a cooling fan which screws behind the screen. The only external difference is the new model lacks the S label on the front and rear that you saw in the earlier version. The major differences are their sensors and pricing. The X-H2S costs around $2,500 or pounds and is designed for speed with a 26 megapixel stacked sensor capable of 40 frames per second bursts, 6.2K open gate video and reduced rolling shutter. Meanwhile, the X-H2 is cheaper, costing around $2,000 or £1,900, and it's designed for detail with a new 40 megapixel back illuminated sensor, 8K video and the chance to generate 160 megapixel images using a pixel shift composite mode. Now 40 megapixels makes the X-H2 the highest resolution APS-C camera in its peer group, leapfrogging not just the 26 megapixel models in the series to date, but also Canon's 32 megapixel EOS R7. Numerically, it approaches more expensive full-frame models, although of course by squeezing all those pixels into a smaller APS-C sensor area, you're going to want to use a very sharp lens to make the most of it. Meanwhile, we may have seen pixel shift on the GFX series before, but this represents its debut on the X series, using the IBIS system to capture a sequence of 20 RAW files, which are then combined in software later to generate a 160 megapixel image. Now it uses 20 frames rather than the 16 on the GFX system due to the more complex X transcolor filter array, and do note that it's a tripod-based mode only. When the software is available for my final review, I'll show you how it looks. Now the X-H2 may not match the speed of the S version, but it'll still shoot at 15 frames per second using its mechanical shutter at the full resolution, or up to 20 frames per second with the electronic shutter, albeit incurring a 1.29 times crop. The camera also supports an even faster electronic shutter speed, up from the 32 thousandth of a second of previous models to 180 thousandth of a second, as well as a slightly lower base sensitivity of 125 ISO. Interestingly, the high-resolution sensor has also allowed Fujifilm to pack in more phase detect AF points than previous models, so while the S version may have faster readout and more confident tracking as a result, the X-H2 version has the potential to be more accurate in single AF modes, particularly on very finely detailed subjects. That said, both models share the same subject detection system, and while the X-H2's autofocus may not be as quick as the S version, it should still be quicker than the X-T4 in practice. Certainly it's no slouch as seen in this casual demo. Okay, so let's have a look at those 40 megapixels in action with a nice detailed view of the New York skyline that I took with the final production X-H2 fitted with the XF16-55 2.8 zoom, and that's a lens which Fujifilm reckons is sharp enough for the new sensor. All of my samples here are out of camera JPEGs, and as you can see there is a tremendous amount of detail possible at the base sensitivity of 125 ISO. Here's another urban view, but under dimmer conditions at 400 ISO. Here, there's still loads of fine details if you're pixel peeping, and no obvious evidence of the high sensitivity smearing the image at all. How about a more natural subject at an even higher sensitivity of 1000 ISO? I snapped this squirrel with the lens at 55 2.8, focusing on the eye, and looking closely again shows a great deal of fine details being captured even at this higher ISO. Now, I'll of course have a more detailed ISO comparison in my final review, but so far I'd say the X-H2 is doing a pretty good job even with its very high pixel count. The X-H2 also becomes the first APS-C camera to record 8K video up to 30p, and like the S version, you have a choice of codecs including 10-bit internal ProRes or 12-bit external RAW over HDMI, and that can be in ProRes or Blackmagic formats. 4K is available up to 60p, or in an HQ mode up to 30p that's oversampled from 8K. Or you can exploit this extra resolution to deliver a 2x digital zoom while maintaining 4K resolution. There's no recording limit, with Fujifilm quoting around 2.5 hours of 8K on a single battery at temperatures of 25 Celsius, although under hotter conditions that will reduce considerably. They're quoting 13 minutes at 40 degrees Celsius. But fit the optional cooling fan and you can extend 8K recording times to 240 or 60 minutes respectively at those two temperatures, and I'll of course be putting this to the test in my full review. If you're into slow motion, you'll be disappointed the X-H2 lacks the 4K 120 of the S version and actually only offers high frame rates between 100 and 240p in 1080 resolution. All of these high-speed modes also incur a crop and suffer from reduced resolution compared to standard 1080 available up to 60p. Alright, so let's see how it looks in practice, starting with 1080 at 25p, filmed with a final production X-H2 in the Interna film simulation, and using the XF16-55 zoom at f5.6. Next, for slow motion, switching to 1080 100p, which is slowed by 4 times here on my timeline, where you'll notice a crop to the field of view, as well as a reduction in overall detail. And now for 1080 at 200p, slowed to 8 times on this timeline, again with a crop in the field of view and that reduced quality. Next, back to standard 1080 at 25p using the full sensor width, before switching to 4K at 25p. Like Canon's EOS R5, there's actually two different 4K modes here, and this is the standard one, available up to 60p. And now for 4K HQ mode, which oversamples from 8K's worth of data, albeit now only available up to 30p. Look closely at both clips and the HQ version is definitely resolving more detail, although that standard mode previously still looked pretty good. The next step up in quality is 6.2K, again available between 24 and 30p, and again delivering a step up in detail over both standard and HQ 4K modes. And finally, the top movie resolution of 8K, again available from 24 to 30p, and again delivering a further boost in detail. Since all these clips are being presented on a 4K project though, I'll now punch in for a closer look. So let's go back to 1080 at 25p before zooming into 200%. And now let's switch to standard 4K, again you're looking at this at 200%, followed by 4K HQ at 200% again, before switching to 6.2K, again at 200%, and finally 8K at 200%, where you should hopefully better notice that gradual increase in detail, at least if you're viewing this video in 4K on a 4K monitor. I'll show many more comparisons in my final review. Before wrapping up though, a quick rolling shutter test, here starting with the X-H2 in standard 4K mode at 25p, and you can see here that it is exhibiting greater skewing than the S version, as indeed you'd expect due to its slower sensor readout, although I should note that it is actually a little better than the previous X-T4 generation. But if you use any of the top 3 modes of 4K HQ, 6.2K or 8K, you should be aware that the rolling shutter will become more obvious due to the slower sensor readout, and in fact the end result will look a little worse than the X-T4, so do use those modes with caution. And that's all I have time for in this video. I hope it gave you a good basic overview of the camera, where it fits in the range and what it's capable of, and once again I'll be following it up soon with a much more in-depth review of the photo and video quality. Once that video is ready, I'll link to it here, but please do consider subscribing to my channel so that you're notified as soon as it's available. Thanks for watching, let me know what you think of the X-H2 in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.